With that, I'll call the meeting to order. Uh, First order of business is approval of the agenda. That was sent out ahead of time. Looking for a motion and a second.
Motion to approve Mark Ankeny.
Second, Ludwig.
Thank you, Mark and Mike. This being a virtual meeting, I'm only going to seek dissenting votes on the motions today. And so I'll ask, are there any nays to the motion and the approval of the agenda? Hearing none, the item passes. Next up, we have the approval of the minutes from our September meeting. Those minutes were included in the packet. Do I have a motion and a second?
So moved, Larson Urbandale.
Second, Ludwig.
Thank you, John and Mike. So we have a motion and a second on approval of September minutes. Is there anyone opposed to the approval of September minutes? Or any discussion on amendments, I guess, as well? Hearing none, the motion passes. And then next up, we have item 4, report and vote on some tip amendment. Zach, I think you're going to cover that one.
Yes, thank you. We have one tip amendment before you this month. This is from Polk County. That's for their Southeast 6th Avenue project. This project was awarded $460,000 in STBG funding. The change here is that the original project description had the project going from Southeast 92nd Street to Southeast Camp Drive. They had already completed some work up to Southeast Garrett Avenue, so they need to change the description to from Southeast Garrett from Southeast Garrett Drive to Southeast Camp Drive. So it's a very minimal change to the project, but still requires us to go through the amendment process. It's only changing the project by about 1/10 of a mile. Happy to take any questions about this. Otherwise, it's before you for your approval.
So moved, John Dostart.
Thank you, John. Do we have a second?
Second, Mark.
Thank you, John and Mark. Thank you, Zach. Anyone opposed to the motion to approve this tip amendment? Hearing none, the item passes. Next up, we have a report on governance assessment and upcoming projects. I think, Dylan, are you going to kick us off?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just getting some ears. So for those of you that don't know, the MPO over the last several months has been undertaking what we're calling a governance assessment. And this was really not a governance in terms of like who should be a member government and how does that work, but more tactical things like, are we meeting at the right times? Are we doing things the right way? Do communities feel like they're getting a benefit from being an MPO member and those sorts of things? There was a governance insights document that was included in the agenda packet. The MPO Policy Committee last month received and filed this packet, and now we're working on action steps to implement the findings and some of the recommendations from that. If you haven't looked through that, I'll briefly touch on a few things that were included in there before we jump to the thing that we really wanted to talk to you about, because this is, I think it helps paint some of a picture of why we're going in this direction. There were two main findings, and these are found on page 12 of that document if you happen to have it pulled up. But basically what was found in some of the survey work and also comparing to some other MPOs, they compared, we looked at MPOs in the Omaha, Council Bluffs area, Mappa, the Kansas City Metro, Columbus, Ohio, and then Orlando, Florida were the 4 peer metros that we looked at, and looked at how they engage with their members. So some of it's coming from that too. But one of the things that we found was there could probably be some more engagement from our representatives into the MPO's work. And that was pretty much focused on the policy committee and the executive committee. We didn't really talk about the executive committee, or I'm sorry, the technical committee. But I think some of these findings would probably fit with this group as well. And so some of the ways that other MPOs and what the policy committee has discussed in terms of improving member engagement would be simple things like showing up to the meetings, making sure you're prepared, and some of those types of things. And that's why we looked at some of the discussions where do we continue to meet in a hybrid format, which is how the policy and executive committee work, versus go full time back to in person. Again, we didn't talk about the technical committee in those discussions, but that's something potentially for consideration. But also looking at maybe having more project-based committees. And those, again, that's how some of these other MPOs operate. And they felt that that would be a way to potentially get more engagement and more ownership of some of the work that the MPO is doing, rather than having it be more staff driven. And then at the end, we bring it forward and the committees, the technical and executive policy take it from there. But actually having them more involved in the work leading up to that, and wanting to be sensitive that everyone has a lot of committees and not wanting to overburden people, but still thinking that's probably a good way to go. So what we have for you here on the next couple of slides, we'll get into in a moment, are some of the projects that we have, some of the planning projects from our work program that we have identified for the remainder of the fiscal year. And we'll talk about those here in a moment. But first, I just wanted to pause and see if anyone has had a chance to review that. If you see anything in there you want to further pull out, discuss. Again, this is kind of focused on executive policy, but if there's anything for the technical committee as we think about governance, before we jump into some of these projects. So I'll just pause for a moment. We can always come back to. In terms of some of these project-based subcommittees, our thinking as staff is that they would probably need to be both technical and policy representatives on those project-based subcommittees, because a lot of what we do is pretty technical. The elected officials aren't going to have that level of insight to some of these activities. And at the same time, I think we will need some of those elected officials to help move these things along from a policy perspective, to get them over the finish line, depending on what those are, right? So it's going to need to be a combination of that. And we don't want to get in a situation where we're meeting just to meet. Each committee will probably have to have its own charter, for lack of a better term. It won't be that formal, but how frequently they're going to meet. Are they going to be online versus in person? What's their duration? Are they kind of evergreen committees, or are they going to be for a limited duration of time? And so all these things will still have to be fleshed out. But I'll turn it over to Gunnar, and he'll walk us through some of the upcoming projects that we've identified and give a little more insight as far as what we see these looking like, as far as what their purpose and need are and how they could go. But we really want to hear feedback from you all. And also, we're going to put a survey in the chat with these different projects. And what we're hoping is that we can start getting feedback from you as a technical committee of which projects you might want to be involved with as we start to form these committees. And then we'll get those committees together and flesh out more of the details. So again, I'll pause if there's any questions, but then turn it over to Gunnar to walk through some of those projects.
Okay, I'm not hearing anything, so I'm gonna get going. Thank you, Dylan. Good morning, everyone. The survey that he mentioned is in chat if everyone wants to open that up. As you can see, we've identified 5 projects where we could really benefit from some guidance and input from our tech members here in the next 3 to 6 or 9 months, potentially. I'll walk through them one at a time. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me. So the first one is pavement condition forecasting. This is something we've done on and off over the last several years. We are training up new staff. With the departure of Andrew, we're training up new staff on this. And what we have the opportunity to kind of recalibrate or kind of the assumptions that go into the modeling. And we would like for those assumptions to be as uniform as possible, or rather provide as much value to as many members as possible, because obviously different jurisdictions are going to handle their maintenance programming differently. So we could really use some input, especially at the early outset of setting up the methodology for that software. Related to that is the trails pavement condition forecasting. This is what the data that we collect from the Iowa data bike. And I think as we set up that model, which is also performed in the DTEM software, it would be helpful to understand from an engineering perspective the types of treatment strategies and pricing estimates that will help inform that projection model. Another one, this came as a request from one of our member jurisdictions to look very long-term at preserving corridors for long-term growth here. And I think that would be useful to have perspectives from the various jurisdictions if you're seeing a lot of growth in a certain area and have places in mind in the broader region where we should be thinking proactively about preserving corridors. Next up is a goods movement study or regional truck route study. The city of Des Moines recently asked our staff to map out where the truck routes are now, where trucks are traveling, where they shouldn't be, come up with recommendations of potential changes. And while the city, I believe, found that to be of value, I think there was consensus that it would bring a lot more value if that study were broadened to be more regional, because of course trucks operate on a regional basis and regardless of jurisdictional boundaries. So I think that would be really helpful to have perspective as well as some potential relevant data and context from our reps. By context, I'm thinking of the complaint files that the city of Des Moines shared with us that helped inform the work that we did for that truck route analysis in the city of Des Moines. Lastly, demographics forecasting. I think, this committee is pretty in tune with this. Obviously, it's an important part of long-range transportation planning for us, and there's different models for different communities or different methodologies. And we've had some suggestions that we should explore a more regional approach to this forecasting. And so what we'd like to do is get input and guidance from our tech reps to make sure that it would be really great to all be pointing in the same direction on how we forecast our demographics as a region. Last but not least, we are hoping to initiate planning on an active transportation plan. We haven't had one of these updated for about a decade. And there's a potential that we get grant funding from that. There's also potential that we end up having to do it internally. So how we approach that plan is still kind of up in the air. Regardless, we'll want engagement from our tech members on that. So I'll pause here. Those are the 5 projects we identified that are coming up in the not too distant future where your engagement would be valuable. If you have any questions, comments, or you want to express interest here now in the meeting, that would be great. Otherwise, you have the survey in the chat, and we'll also share the survey in the post-meeting email.
What type of time commitment are you looking for? Is there like a certain number of meetings per month or per quarter?
Well, I would say, Mark, that can be driven by the committee. And I think it needs to be situational to the task. So for example, on the roadway pavement condition stuff, I would see those as a handful of meetings, and that could even be individually or as a group. I'm thinking 1 or 2, like 1 to provide input, 2 to provide feedback. Because I think what we're really trying to get at with this governance is not just meeting to meet. Like you might recall, we had the engineering subcommittee meeting that we had monthly and a planning subcommittee meeting that we had monthly, and those kind of phased out. But I think by being intentional about meeting for specific projects, we can minimize time commitments and just make sure that the time you are committing is very focused and providing value on a specific product.
Okay, thank you.
I'll add, we presented here, 5 or 6 projects. If there are others that you see value in the MPO helping convene, even if it's not something in our work program, please let us know that too. We want to make this a place and a forum where there can be regional collaboration in whatever form that needs to be. I'll also add that going forward, we're kind of doing this now in October, which is a little random. We put together a work program usually in the January, February, March timeframe. So we'll look to do something like this again. And our goal, or at least our thought at this point, is that this kind of exercise will happen around then. So that way it's just all included in that work program. So here are the projects we're going to do. Here are the committees that are going to do them. Here's kind of the duration that they'll last. Just like you would see a scope of work maybe from a consultant or something that would kind of put all that information together there. That's kind of the direction we hope to move towards as we go forward here.
Well, thank you. If there's no other questions, just encourage folks to, if you haven't already signed up, then consider, I think Gunnar said there'll be an email. Gunnar, would you entertain alternates as well to participate?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Next up, I believe we have an update on the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. Zach, you gonna lead that one?
Yes, thank you. So just want to give you a quick update on where we're at with the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. The consultants continue to work on this product. They are going through an additional round of public input. So similar to the last round where the public was asked to identify locations across the region that either they felt unsafe or they felt safe or they had some near misses as far as traffic accidents go. We're asking to do a similar thing. So it's map-based, looking at the high injury and high risk networks overlaid on those maps and asking the public to identify their top priority location for safety improvements. So we've got a link to that that we'll send out in the post-meeting email. We'd ask that you just kind of send that out to your networks, take a look at the map, put a priority location on there that you feel like needs to be addressed. On the next slide, there's a kind of a project schedule. The area in that triangle, the red triangle, is kind of where they're at right now. They're on various different stages of completing those 3 different items in that triangle. So the countermeasures toolbox, looking at various different ways to address safety issues at different locations, a visualization tool for Vision Zero, and then their implementation plan and program as well. So that's kind of the key things they're working on currently. They have started to also work on the actual draft plan. The plan is to have that completed and in front of committees for approval in January of next year. In addition to that, they will also start working on an implementation grant. We have learned a few things about that. We were under the impression that maybe we might need resolutions from every community across the region. We have gotten a little clarity from the Safe Streets and Roads for All people at the federal highway level that as long as we have a resolution at the MPO level, any community who's a part of that can use that resolution of that higher entity. So just wanted to throw that out there, but that's the update on where we're at with the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. Happy to take any questions that you have, but wanted to let you know what's happening with the plan.
Zach, what's the timing on that implementation grant?
We do not know for sure when that NOFA is going to be released. I believe last time it was released in the spring, so we're kind of targeting that, but we don't know for sure when that NOFA will be released in this next round. We also have an election between now and then, and things could change, so just kind of, but want to have it prepared so that when that NOFA does come out, we're ready to submit for it.
And then is the current idea that the MPO would apply, or is it that the individual member communities would apply?
That currently we're operating under the idea that the MPO would apply. That was the original plan when we submitted for the grant. I don't believe that would keep any of the individual members from also applying if they wanted to. That's our understanding anyway.
Any other questions for Zach? Well, I'll just add a comment just because I've participated, in the subcommittee that, just really appreciate the work that the MPO team and the consultants are doing, especially to balance all the various needs across the region. I know that can be a challenge. We talk about especially rural and urban, all the different modes. I really feel like they're trying to be comprehensive in assessing all the needs. Okay, let's move on to item 7, the draft long-range transportation plan chapters. Zach again.
So last month we to present to you kind of the draft content of the plan and discuss the timeline moving forward. So this is just more of a reminder item that we do have all the draft content up on the website for public review. That was posted around September 23rd. We have a public input meeting coming up on October 9th, an opportunity for anybody from the public to come in and provide any comments that they have. Otherwise, they have the opportunity to go online and comment on any of the draft chapters that are up there. We'll present any of the feedback that we've received at the October 17th policy committee meeting. And then between now and early November, we'll be working to incorporate any of the comments that we receive into that document. Just for example, we have received some comments from the airport as well as from some freight people. So we are making some edits to that chapter 4 that looks at aviation and freight. So if you do have some time, please do take a look at the draft content. If there's anything you'd like to see us add or address, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and we'll look into that. The public comment period does close on October 23rd. As I mentioned, we'll incorporate any of the comments that we need to into that final document, which ultimately we'll be presenting to the policy committee at their November 21st meeting for final approval. Happy to take any questions you have about the development of the draft LRTP.
So Zach, it looks like this committee won't necessarily take an action on the draft. And so it sounds like people's opportunity is now to weigh in.
That's correct. That's correct. Now is the time to weigh in. We haven't traditionally ever voted on the draft. It's just put out there and then there's the opportunity to provide your input comment on it, which we'll then incorporate into the final draft. And this committee will vote on the final draft in November.
Okay. Yeah. So just want to emphasize that for folks that you have a couple more weeks to make sure you get your feedback in so that can be incorporated.
Thank you.
There's no other questions. Move on to item 8. Carbon reduction program applications. Again with Zach.
Okay, so we had the applications out there for carbon reduction program. The deadline to submit those was back on September 27th. We have received 8 different applications from 5 of our member governments. You can see there on the screen before you a table that summarizes the applications that were submitted. We had one from the city of Ankeny for South Ankeny Boulevard and Ore Labor Road intersection improvements. Des Moines submitted for a 5th Avenue Complete Street project. Johnston for their Iowa 141 Northwest Towner Drive interchange. We got 4 projects from the city of Pleasant Hill, one for the Youngstown Trail, one for a electric vehicle upgrade, one for their Northeast 70th Street Phase 1 improvements, and then a traffic signal improvement project, and then a traffic signal improvement project from the city of Urbandale. The funding requests are also there on the right side of the table. You can see that we have a little over $9.1 million in requests, and we're going to probably have approximately around $7.1 million available to award. So, obviously we're not going to be able to fulfill all the requests. So the funding subcommittee will have a tough decision to make. Speaking of schedule, I think I've got that on the next slide. So there's a presentation workshop coming up next week on October 9th. This will be an opportunity for the applicants to present their projects to the funding subcommittee. The funding subcommittee will then be able to ask any questions that they have of the applicants specific to their projects. And then we will be able to, the funding subcommittee is going to meet immediately following that meeting on October 9th. They'll just convene and discuss what their award recommendation is. So should be able to share out that recommendation probably late next week. We'll present it at the policy in October, but then ultimately it'll come back to the committees in November for approval ultimately on November 17th at the policy committee meeting. And once those awards are approved, we will go into the tip and make those changes into our tip so that they're official and the projects can move forward. Just wanted to give you that update on where we're at with carbon reduction, which applications have been submitted, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Questions for Zach? Zach, can you remind us, is there additional funding that's still going to roll in addition to the 7 point whatever that we have currently, or is that 7 point whatever that's actually envisioning the total amount?
That's the vision in total now. So we've got funding from 2026 through 2029. I think the decision that the funding subcommittee will need to make is whether or not we look at that 29 funding. So we don't know exactly what that funding is yet. We won't know until probably late February. So a decision all to make is whether or not they want to consider that 29 funding in this round. They may decide to push that off into the next round potentially. If they do that, then we have around $5.5 million available.
Okay. So potential for one additional round based on that 29 funding, potentially, but really up for the committee to decide.
Yep.
Okay.
And we still don't know yet how, if this program continues, the plan is that every year we would just be awarding 1 year of funding. Right now, we're trying to catch up because we've gotten behind on awarding that funding out.
Okay. Got it. Any other questions? Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.
Addison, I think you're going to cover upcoming events.
Yes, I am. Hello, good morning. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Elise. The first event that I'll highlight is this weekend at the Jordan Creek Town Center in West Des Moines. There's the Central Iowa EV Summit, and the MPO will be presenting at 3 o'clock tomorrow, Friday, October 4th, on our recently submitted CFI grant application to the Federal Highway Administration. Yep, that's at Jordan Creek in West Des Moines all weekend. Next slide, please. And then I'll just highlight a number of webinars and events coming up. October is National Community Planning Month, so keep an eye out for a number of webinars on the left, and then just a few events I'll highlight on the right. Today and tomorrow in Council Bluffs, Iowa is the Iowa Bike Summit, Iowa Trail Summit. Carl's up there presenting on the data bike. Again, tomorrow through Sunday is the Central Iowa EV Summit. And then in 2 weeks, APA Iowa in Sioux City. I believe tomorrow is the last day to register for that. So get on that if you're planning to go. And happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Addison?
Luis, I just dropped a couple more dates in the chat for the Iowa Traffic and Safety Forum, sponsored by Iowa DOT and Institute of Transportation at Iowa State, and also the ITE Iowa Section Conference.
Great. Thank you, John. Next up is item 10, other non-action items of interest to the committee. We have any? Maybe not. Well, if there's nothing else, then our next meeting is on November 7th at the usual time, 9:30. I will entertain a motion to adjourn in a second, please.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mike. And I'm sorry I didn't catch the second.
This is Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mike and Mark. With that, we stand adjourned. See everybody next month. Thank you.